Good. As long as I don't know if Eric can hear us yet, this is the only thing.
Okay, I call a special meeting Tuesday, May 25th, 6 p.m. Manchester Community School Board. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Excuse me. Roll call. Mr. Hensley. Here. Mr. Shaw.
Here.
Mr. Esposette is absent. Mr. Brubaker.
Here.
Mr. Bucher.
I am here.
And Mr. Raymer is absent. Dave Turflinger, president, is here. Emergency additions or deletions. Under discussion information, we're going to put down counselor position for a discussion. Dr. Rowe is going to do some explaining on the possible counselor position. So we'll add that after the 3.5 and be 3.6. Dr. Rowe, anything else?
We have nothing.
Board, anything else? Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda is amended, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Recommendations for approval. SACA equipment purchase.
Yes, I sent you information in your packet. We're looking at moving forward. There is about a 120-day time period to be able to get this equipment, so we need to start moving forward. We know we're still trying to search for funding for it. We're also looking at CARES Act 3.0 to try to get some money for that as well. It'll be $136,000, $136,207. That does not include our shipping cost. The gentleman I got the quote from thought that was a little unreasonable, so we're going to work on that piece of it. But we just want permission to be able to move forward and get it purchased now for implementation this fall.
I would entertain a motion to approve the 2.0 SACA equipment purchase. Mr. Brubaker. Mr. Hensley seconded. Discussion, questions?
I have a question, just, did I don't know. So 4 months until it gets here, right? Essentially. That's the best case scenario, right? That's if everything is going whatever. I talked briefly with Dave over here, but are we doing something in the fall? Because this is not going to be here in the fall, right?
Well, we hope it's here. That's why we'd like to be able to get it ordered like tomorrow,
So you're planning on having a course with this equipment?
This is not a course. This is embedded in one of our courses. And if you saw what we have Principles of Industry 4.0 and Digital Manufacturing. Those are where they're embedded into. And so he does have some other things he can do until he does get that equipment. So, yes, we would love to have it as soon as possible. And hopefully that will happen. That was the goal. It's already been in place. We're just taking the SACA pieces and putting in another curriculum, correct?
Does this also include the training aspect for this summer?
This cost is not. This is just for the equipment. They're working with Ivy Tech on the training this summer. Karen has already reached out to them and working on it.
And this is already a state-approved curriculum.
Yes, it was just like about a month ago, I think, is when it happened. Sounds right.
Is Mr. Hooks pretty well on board with this, and is he?
Oh, yeah, he's 100% on board, and
Good.
he's the one that's gonna go get the training.
Good.
He's very excited about it.
Good.
Any other further discussion or questions?
This is a junior, senior, no, freshman, sophomore level class, is that right?
I am not sure about that. It does not say here on the information I have. I believe it is more of the entry level where they could go on to do more at Heartland if they choose to do that.
Okay.
Because that's what the whole plan was all along, is more of that entry level. And then they can take it to the next level if they choose that's what they want to do.
Have the students gone through the guidance counselors already and booked their classes for next year?
Yes, I believe they already have several students already in this.
Okay, so that was included already into the
Mhm.
guidance counseling? Okay.
And the numbers have changed, so I don't want to tell you what it is because I know it's changed since the first time that we originally talked about. I know it started at like 9, but I was thinking it was up way higher than that right now. It's like in the 20s is what I thought, but
Okay.
I
Thank
don't
you.
want to say.
I mean,
for
just for the
certain.
record, this is something we've been looking at for months, right? And it's, you know, upgrade the technology, not only here at MCF, but, you know, also partnership with Mark and Heartland, you know, to present students whatever grade level. If it's 9 and 10 where they enter here, go down there, juniors and seniors, or we have them, juniors and seniors at first and they transition. I think it's kind of important that we do.
Well, and these classes are also ones that maybe they have wanted at Heartland, but their schedules haven't worked out, or, you know, they just can't make it work, and they want to be able to stay here, and now we have that opportunity for those students.
No, I don't have to be sold on it. I'm curious where we are on the front end of this to make sure that we're able to put kids in the seats for it. So,
Yeah, we have them ready to go.
awesome. Thanks.
Any other questions, discussions? Okay, all in favor?
Can we, okay, all right. I was just asking if we could do a roll call vote.
Yeah,
That's at some point
No,
instead of
Mark's not
doing
here.
it.
You don't need a roll call unless
There's
you
no
have them
Zoom,
right.
electronically.
hey, you're within, yeah, okay,
Okay, but
so,
we don't have to, we already voted, so it's
okay,
fine.
5-0. Dr. Gramel, I'm gonna let you cover 2.0.
I had a feeling you would, so, how do you say the name, is Inare Caro. And that would be the MES kindergarten dual language teachers coming from Madrid. We put this in here as kind of an emergency item because she has to make arrangements for her visa and get over here, and so that takes time. So we need to be able to get this approved as soon as possible to get her here.
Have you agreed to terms? I mean, does this fit in the 55,000 that we've already approved?
We have, I believe, given her an offer, but it does make a difference on the company she's coming through. It could be less, but we've given her what our scale is, and then we'll go from there. So it's either that or lower.
But this is in that 55,000 that we approved for dual language, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion for approval?
And I'm not trying to stir the pot here. You see she's working through a company or something to,
Yes, and they've been all approved through IDOE.
okay,
They've been vetted, and then they give us certain names, and then we interview those people, and then that's how we select our candidate.
Okay, and that was where I was going with it.
Yes.
I'm just
Yes.
curious of.
It's
okay.
not some random person
Well, and
out there, but
I'm, not that I
You
don't
know,
have
you
faith
did
in you
their
folks, I was
homework.
just
Sure.
my indiscriminate,
Sure.
so.
you
Okay.
wouldn't know, so.
Okay.
So do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Hensley, do we have a second? Raju, Mr. Shaw? Any further discussion?
How come, can I ask why you went with the company for this?
Because we tried to find someone within the states and we were not, everything kind of kept falling through. She had several candidates, and some of them were not as fluent in Spanish as what originally thought, and some other reasons. But, so then she went this route, was very, very pleased with this candidate, who's already been in the States, I think at least twice. She's in 2 other positions, like one in Texas, and I don't remember where the other one was, but she's very, very excited about it.
Okay, I have to be a devil's advocate for just a minute here. Since we're using a company, are we locked in for the whole year? If this person doesn't work out, do we have another option to get somebody else?
Well, we always have a teacher contract, so she would be a first-year teacher, just like anyone else. So if it doesn't work out, we're not obligated to keep her after that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Are we paying expenses for the airfare and such?
No.
Do you want a roll call vote on this, Mr. Booker? Or?
That's okay. I
Okay.
just wanted to mix it up a little bit, that's all.
Okay.
For the bigger votes, you know?
That's all right.
No pressure votes, you
Yeah,
know?
no problem. If there's no further discussion, I'll call a vote. All in favor? 5-0. Baker Tilly.
Okay, this evening we have Mr. Jason Tanzel from Baker Tilly, and we also have Mr. Eric Long from Ice Miller. And Jason will be able to provide the financial information. And I think in the packet that I sent you, there were 4 different options, and those were just brainstormed throughout this process as we started the strategic planning process. And ultimately, just want him to be able to kind of talk you through those and for you to give any questions that you have to them that they may be able to answer for you or help you clarify things. And then Eric would be here representing Ice Miller if questions arose about projects and how can you split them up and those type of things. He has all the knowledge in that area from the legal aspects of doing projects. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason and kind of let him start.
Thank you, Jeremy, and good evening, everyone. Before I get started, I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me clearly. I've got my headset on, so usually that works pretty well, but if you could just let me know that you can hear me, that'd be great, and then we'll get underway.
Looks good.
We're all
Sounds
good.
Great, wonderful. Well, again, my name is Jason Tanzel with Baker Tilly, and we serve as the school corporation's municipal advisor. And as Jeremy mentioned, been working the last few months on some financing options for Manchester Community Schools that would look to address capital needs throughout the district. And we do have 4 options here for you tonight. But I really do just want to encourage you to stop me as I go, ask any questions. It's an 8-slide presentation that will review the debt service fund. The projects being discussed here tonight, we would be looking at bond issuance, and that bond issuance would be paid through the school's debt service fund. And so just feel free to stop me at any time, but I do have a presentation here that I will review with the board. So with that, I'm going to jump right in here to slide 2. Slide 2. It looks like you can see it on my Zoom screen, so if you can't see the payments, it's okay to also just go to slide 3. Slide 3 is a graph of a visual, if that's a little easier to see. But Here on slides 2 and 3, we have detailed the bonds that are currently repaid from the school corporation's debt service fund. And I do want to take a little bit of time here to go over the 7 bonds that are currently outstanding, because they play a role into the tax rate management component of the debt service fund and looking at any potential illustrative bond offerings. And so you can see here that the school has 2 common school loans in the first 2 columns that will be repaid this year and next year. And then there are 3 first mortgage bonds. There's a first mortgage bond in 2012, a first mortgage bond in 2013, and one from 2016. And then there are also 2 general obligation bonds. Each bond, we have listed their annual payment. So again, you can see on common school loan 2735, for example, there is 1 annual payment left on that bond, and it is repaid this year. So going down the line, you can see the 2012 bonds, the annual payment of each one, and that's repaid by 2024. The same with the 2013 bonds. You can see, again, so on and so forth, the annual payments of each bond. The far right column is a total of all annual debt service payments. And annual debt service payments are a large component of the debt service tax rate. And so the debt service tax rate is composed of cash balances on hand within the debt service fund, annual payments that are being projected or ones that are projected to retire, and then net assessed value. And so here you can see the total annual payments of all bonds outstanding in 2021 is $1,921,200. And you can see payments in 2022 are at about the same level at $1,914,176. And then you can see in 2023 we have about a $300,000 decline in annual payments, another $300,000 decline in 2024, with all debt repaid materially by 2025, and then that one final payment in 2026. And I just want to take a time here to just talk about the flexibility that retiring debt service payments have that provide the school corporation down the road. Because to the extent you would see a declining debt service payment, depending upon assessed value and debt service cash balances, we would also potentially be projecting a debt service tax rate fall. And so, again, when you see those debt service payments all being retired by 2026, essentially that is saying that the tax rate would be falling with those payments. And so on slide 3 here, it's the same information that is detailed in slide 2, but the visual, I think, really hits home the point that annual payments, you can see the levels that we are at from 2021, and then all debt being repaid by 2026. And so again, all of these bond payments that are coming to maturity, that provides the school corporation flexibility down the road to be considering addressing any capital needs through a bond issuance that would be repaid through this debt service fund. So before I start going into any of the illustrative financing options, I just did want to take a little break here and see if there's any questions about the first 2 slides. All right. Seeing none, we will move on to a summary slide of the 4 options that we have prepared for the school corporation here. We labeled them options 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they really do provide each option is a little bit different in the sense of borrowing amount, repayment term, tax rate impacts. And so options 1 and 2, we have illustrated a $16,725,000 borrowing. Excuse me. And in talking with the school corporation, this borrowing amount potentially could be, just as an example, it could be 3 separate non-controlled projects. So that is the reasoning behind the $16,725,000 requirement. You can see on that third column, the estimated repayment term on option 1 is 19 years. And legally, the maximum repayment term of a bond issuance is not to exceed 20. And so this one way to think of option 1 is this is our maximum repayment term. Option 2, again, the same borrowing amount, $16,725,000. But this would be keeping debt service payments at approximately the same level. How fast can we repay $16,725,000 while keeping payments at the same level? So you can see here that option 2, the repayment term on that third column is 13 years. Option 3 is a $10 million 10-year bond that would be paid again through 10 years. I just mentioned that, but you can see what that would look like on one of our slides down on slide 7. And then option 4 would be, so option 4 is a little different timing-wise. I haven't made mention of this yet, but you can see here on the second row the issuance date. And options 1 through 3, we've assumed a bond being issued in May of next year, May of 2022. Option 4 looks at what would it look like to issue a bond this fall in October of 2021 and repaying that in 5 years because that matches the maturity of all bonds being repaid by 2026. Also, option 4 would maintain the debt service tax rate at current levels, and you'll see on options 1 through 3 that that's a little different as well. And so the other parameters that we've provided, or not parameters, but other financing points that we've provided are total estimated interest expense. Again, that you can see on option 1, the $4.8 million would be our estimate using today's interest rates, and you can see that when you repay the bonds a little quicker, the estimated interest expense on option 2 would be just under $2.8 million using today's interest rates. Again, so on and so forth. You can see the estimated interest expenses with each option. You can see options 3 and 4 there as well. But my final point here on this summary slide is that none of these options would increase the school's debt service tax rate, assuming assessed value remains constant. So I know that's a lot of numbers, but we have some slides here that will hopefully make it a little more clear. But again, I want to stop here before I go into any slides. I need to, for some reason, I have to take on my note. I'm going to take a quick water break. But if you have any questions before I go into the slides, please let me know.
So you're saying option 4 basically keeps us net to our current tax rate over that 5-year
Yes.
period? Okay.
That is correct. That would keep the debt service tax rate relatively constant for the next 5 years through 2026. And again, that tax rate is very dependent upon the school's assessed value, whether or not that grows or declines. And that is just something that is beyond our control, beyond the school corporation's control.
You're talking about the 7% of the assessed value of the school's property? Or were you talking about property assessments countywide?
For the assessed value, that is just within the school corporation.
Okay,
So
right.
three,
We're limited. Okay. I just wanted to clarify because everybody else's assessments are climbing. I mean, in Wabash County, so I wanted to make sure which one we were talking about. On the option 2, at 13 years, 8 months, how close to, option 1 and 2, how close does that put us to our 7% cap that we're allowed to borrow against our assessed value?
I'm not sure, can you elaborate please on the 7% cap that you're referring to?
We're only allowed to borrow up to 7% of the assessed value of the school corporation's property, is that correct?
Not to my knowledge, but Eric, I don't know if there's any legal statute area that you're on that intermediate if you're talking, but There is a general obligation bonding capacity that we prepared before in the past, and that limitation is 2% of 1/3 of the school corporation's net assessed value. And so the general obligation bonds that the school has issued previously in 2019 and 2020 fit within that constraint, the 2% of 1/3 of net assessed value.
Okay, so I guess my question is on option 1 and 2, how close, are we gonna be landlocked as far as being able to borrow any more money if something happens?
We'll just go here to slide 5. I think this answers your question. Depending upon the school corporation's objectives. Slide 5, this is the graph and visual of what $16,725,000 borrowed would look like with that maximum repayment term of just under 20 years and a bond issuance in 2022. And so here you can see in gray, those are the prior payments of the school corporation that were on slides 2 and 3. The green bars, those represent proposed payments, of the $16,725,000 bond in 2022. So you can see here that if we issue a bond in 2022, those would not hit the tax rolls until 2023. And so that's why we have the green bar first hitting in 2023. And then our final payment in 2041, utilizing that maximum repayment term. And then the line graph here, the black dotted line running through the bars, those would be our projections for the school's debt service tax rate. You can see here that assuming, again, no changes in assessed value or miscellaneous revenues, that the school corporation would actually be looking at a slight decline in its debt service tax rate in 2022, and then slight declines throughout until 2027 to just over 30 cents, whereas the school corporation's current debt service tax rate is approximately 53 cents. So to answer your question, this option, while utilizing the maximum payment term, and again, incurring some maybe the interest expense, it does provide flexibility down the road if there are any sort of other projects that the school needed to address, any emergencies that need to be taken care of through another bond issuance through the debt service fund, anything like that. But again, that assumes that the objective and priority of the school is to not raise the debt service tax rate. So then, if you move on to slide 6, then you can see here, slide 6 is the shorter repayment term of the $16,725,000. And again, you can see this would be a May 2022 issuance, hitting the tax rolls first in 2023, and having 13 annual payments there, illustrated by the green bars. And you can see that this would have the debt service tax rate more or less holding steady near current levels. This would be approximately 45-cent debt service tax rate through 2035. And so if the school corporation did not want to increase the tax rate, then this would limit a little bit, so to speak, the school corporation's ability to borrow down the road, should you want to stay under the current tax rate levels. Any other questions before I move on to the different borrowing amounts, the $10 million and the just over $5 million options 3 and 4?
How many times can we do option 4?
We can move here to option 4. That's my final slide, slide 8. How many times? I guess depends on your time range. This one, of course, is only 5 years, but that if you were to think about another bond issuance, for example, in 2026, you'd be looking at replacing over $2 billion worth of payments. And so I guess the answer at how many times, again, it depends on the school corporation's objective on tax rate. And it depends on I guess, how far you take that maturity, how many times you want to do the 5 million or so.
If, I think, I don't know if you're right, or what I'm saying is accurate with what you're saying here, but if we do option 4, it keeps the tax rate pretty much level for that 6 years. And
Yes, that's correct.
if we turn around in 2022 and take another 5 million, how is that gonna look on top of this one? That's, I think, what you were saying, Dave. I'm not sure.
If you were to look at another borrowing in 2022 for another 5 million, those payments would be getting above a level that would be most likely increasing the tax rate. Just dependent again on assessed value, and that there are ways to help mitigate that payment impact. But if you were to just do the same type of borrowing and layer this on top, then we would project the debt service tax rate increase with the second bond issuance.
Jason, this is Eric, if I can chime in for just a moment. Is it fair to say that if you know ahead of time what the planned borrowings are, and potentially if we go beyond 2026, that would also help mitigate any tax rate increase from borrowings beyond that initial $5 million one? So for example, if we know ahead of time of 3 different $5 million projects over the next 4 years, for example, your team would make a point to structure all of the financings accordingly, including the first one out of the gates, so that you could help minimize that impact. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's a great point, Eric. And if it's we can build in this $5 million option does not need to be repaid within 5 years. Again, that maximum repayment term is 20. Now, I don't think we would be looking at 20 years for $5 million, but we can structure it in such a way that maybe if you go to slide 3, I know this isn't 5 million, slide 7, excuse me. Slide 7, while this is 10 million, is just kind of an illustrative example of what 5 million could look like if we took the $5 million out 10 years. You can just imagine potentially those green bars being lower. So if we know ahead of time, and to Eric's point, that maybe we want to do, the school corporation would like to do 5 million this year, but potentially wants to look at 5 million next year as well. We can structure the bonds in such a way to, as Eric's point, to minimize that tax rate impact.
Would there be multiple withdrawal fees?
Yes, there would be with 2 bonds at 2 separate times, there would be 2 separate allowances for cost of issuance.
Jason, the other thing with option 4, just to make note of this, option 4 leaves the tax rate essentially where it's at right now over 5 years. That would limit if something happened and we needed to do like a $1 million bond, we would have to raise the debt service tax rate to take that bond. So just something else to think about with that option and what that might look like.
I would also say we were looking at possibility of doing bonds to pay for buses, so that's not coming out of operations fund anymore. You would not be able to do that with that option as well. It's like if another roof.
I mean, you could if you wanted to do a separate bond for buses or something like that, in addition to this, it would just raise our tax rate.
Yes.
Is what she's saying. Unless you build it into this 5 million.
Right. If part of the 5 million was for buses.
Right. And Eric,
Then you'd be fine, but if not, if you're looking at doing buses every few years to keep up on that fleet,
Eric,
then you would be limited.
I have a question for Eric. If we're looking at option 4 where we're keeping our rate level and we want to borrow 5 million, what are our legal ramifications and our ability and what we can do with that? It's from a project. Can we do buses in that and then do some construction along with that? How does that look?
It's a really good question, and part of it goes to a matter of your capacity for GO bonds, general obligation bonds. And I say that because if you're borrowing strictly for buses, we could not avail ourselves of the lease financing mechanism, which I'll talk about in more detail in just a second, because under that structure, you have to have some kind of a nexus, some kind of a tie into a facility. So depending on what your geocapacity is in whatever you want to borrow, and Jason may be able to help provide some calculation on that. I think a lot of it got used up in the last couple of years with some of your other small borrowings. But if you have any geocapacity, you could use it for that. Another option would be, and I'm just going to use simple math here, you know, if you have needs at any given facility that we can mortgage or already have mortgaged, we could do a lease financing where the bulk of the dollars are being used for that facility. So let's just use the elementary school, for example. We could do, you know, $4 million at the elementary school, and then add in a provision and tell bondholders that we're going to do another $500,000 for the procurement of buses. So two things. One, it becomes a disclosure piece, which is, it's really just our concern, Jason and mine, just to make sure the bondholders know what they're buying the bonds for. And then also there's a federal tax component in that for whatever dollar amount we're using for the purchase of buses, we're going to have to be able to amortize that inside of the average useful life of a bus, which I believe is somewhere between 4 and 5 years. So we'd have to be able to amortize that first $500,000 over the course of 4 or 5 years. So we'd have to make sure that there was that much principal repayment in that time span.
And Eric, if I can chime in here, we do have the school's general obligation capacity, and we talked about that a little bit earlier with the good question from Board Member, and it's $1,635,000. That is the current general obligation bonding capacity after our July payments.
So using that formula that Jason utilized, and I want to go back to this, I'm not aware of any 7% limitation on being able to issue bonds. The limitation that we're accustomed to is the one that Jason mentioned, which is it's that formula of 2% of 1/3 of your assessed valuation. So it sounds like even with the bonds that you've issued already in the last couple of years, you still have, it sounds like, 1.6 million of capacity to do for things like buses or any other items, frankly, that don't necessarily lend themselves to work in any given facility.
I have a question on option 3. If we were to do 10 million, and I think I heard you say that it has to be tied to a building, we have a central campus here that's got 2 buildings in it. What's the ruling on that? Can we borrow 5 million against this one and 5 million against that and build another building in between that would service?
That's a good question.
It would service both of them.
We're talking about putting a central cafeteria between the 2 buildings. There's 700 feet between the buildings. We're thinking about borrowing 5 million from either side if that's what it takes. We don't know yet. We don't know how much it's going to cost. But is that an option where we can do that, to go 5 million off of each one? And
I think what we would likely do, as I look at the summary of your transactions and summary of your mortgages, although can you tell me which 2 schools you'd be looking at having that shared space for?
Eric, it would be our junior high, which is also our central office, and then the high school. It's a parking lot in between the 2 buildings.
Okay. So as I look at your current transactions, the high school, for example, is under its own mortgage. So we would probably favor utilizing the high school as what we would supplement as far as the mortgage. We would also go through some additional procedures so that the real estate for where that addition would be built is encapsulated as well. And so we certainly, the short answer is yes, we could tie it to one of the facilities you have mortgaged, make sure that going forward the legal description would include wherever any new construction is going to go.
thank you. Board, any other questions?
I'm sorry, I wasn't quite clear on that. So you're saying you would tie it to the high school, but could you also borrow money against the junior high administration to use towards that same project or not?
We could, honestly, what we would do, if we got to a certain point where we knew that was going to be the scope of the project, what we do at the outset is do kind of an initial title search, just to confirm what our records are showing, that you have the high school encumbered under an existing mortgage that dates back to 1994 and has been supplemented a few times over the last 20 years. Right now, we're showing that the junior high / admin center is not currently encumbered, but we would obviously want to verify that before we got too far down the road. And if, for example, we found that it was free and clear and that there were advantages to taking that as a new lease and a new mortgage, then we could certainly look at that as an alternative option to tie it, so to speak, to that building through a mortgage. And there's pros and cons of supplementing an existing mortgage or taking out a new one, which we could certainly go into more detail on.
Interest rate different?
Not on facility, no.
I mean, versus supplement versus a new, is the interest rate any different?
No, I think that's more, Jason, correct me wrong, but it's fair to say that for people who look at purchasing Indiana School Corporation bonds, they kind of look at any kind of a lease financing as a highly similar transaction, regardless of whether it's a new mortgage or a supplement of an existing one. Is that fair to say?
That is fair, yes.
Okay, just to confirm, say we want to use $2 million towards the facility at the high school, and we want to use $2 million for the facility here at the junior high. That leaves essentially $6 million that we could meld together to build a central cafeteria. And I'm just giving examples. That's not obviously anywhere close to what would be, but I'm just giving an example. Could we do something of that nature? Is that what you were saying? Yes, we could.
Well, I think that is a good segue to talk about the question of what constitutes a project, and I'm putting that in quotes because that is a definition in Indiana code. So if you'll entertain that for a moment, and can all of you, do you guys have a large enough screen that if I do a screen share, you can see a slide?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Although I think it would have to be, screen share would have to be enabled by whoever the host is.
Yeah, let me.
While they're getting that done, I'd like to ask another question. Option 3, how close does that, as presented, how close does option 3 keep our tax rate close to what it is now? Is there an increase? Is it flat? What is option 3's?
The dotted line is the tax.
Should be able to share now.
No, it's a great question. Option 3, you can see again in 2021. If you look at that first dot on the dotted line, that's that 53-cent level in the school's at. So you can see there that option 3 does put that debt service tax rate a little bit lower in total to about that 45-cent range. But that's not set in stone. I mean, if that, if the school corporation, wants to be as close to 53 cents as possible, we can look at that as well. This was just one option that we presented that we knew was tax rate neutral.
Thank you.
He should be able to share his screen if you let him know.
Yes,
If you
I got it.
show.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what I'm attempting to show, and let me know if you can't see, because I'm on a dual screen in the office, so you should see a slide that says Manchester Community Schools Project Threshold. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I want to note at the outset that the number, as far as the number on the left, 5,575 change, that's an index figure that changes every year relative to what we formally refer to as the average growth quotient. So project thresholds since 2018 have gone up because seemingly that number has also been a positive figure in every year since 2018. So for the calendar year 2021, if you were to adopt a resolution for a given project, and we would define the project accordingly, if it was, and I'll just round down, if it was $5,575,000 or less, we would call that a non-controlled project, which means that there's really no formal taxpayer opposition process. On the far right, I'll skip to the far right, for Manchester Community Schools, for any project that's more than $10 million, that would be subject to the referendum process. And I say subject to because if you don't have folks in the community who file an application petition at the county level to put it on a referendum, or alternatively, if you as a school board don't opt in automatically to put a project on a referendum ballot, if you get through 30 days and no one has filed, you can continue on with that project without having gone to a ballot. The difference is if you go that route and you are successful in just, keeping quiet in the community, that debt still, at the end of the day, is going to be within your tax caps as every other type would be. If you go to a referendum and you are successful, that debt is then going to be outside of your tax caps, which has some inherent advantages to it. Capturing any TIP-AB, and also, not causing any restraint on your operations fund or any other funds would be the obvious ones there. In between those two measures, basically between a project scope of $5,575,000 and $10 million is making that project subject to the petition remonstrance process, which is essentially a clipboard race between folks who are in favor of the project, who literally go out and carry yellow sheets of paper, and those who are against, who carry blue sheets of paper by State Board of Accounts requirements. So those figures are what amount to the thresholds for any taxpayer process for a project. I also want you to add 2 cents and talk about a project in the sense of what little guidance we have from state law or state guidance from the DLGF. And we basically have been told that if you look at the bottom of this slide, and I'll read this as well in case you can't. New in the Indiana Code is the notion that a project must, quote, have an independently desirable end in itself. Meaning, you've got to be able to essentially pass the smell test and say that we can do this defined project and not require any other work to be done in order for this to be considered a project unto itself. As you can see on this slide, it's highly dependent upon facts and circumstances. The most often thing that we look at as defining a project is location. So if you have something at one site, that's typically how we can most plainly define a project. Other factors could include what source of funds you're using, the timing on any given work that's done, and potentially different contracting methods. And I say all this to say that if you're talking about a shared cafeteria facility, most likely that construction of that shared cafeteria facility is going to be deemed a project on its own. So it's not likely that we would be able to take 50% of the dollars for that and allocate it to the high school and 50% of the dollars and allocate it to the junior high, because the DLGF and any other entity who could be looking at this would say the construction of that facility is a project and is an end in itself. So we have to look at the total dollars of the construction of that project, if that makes sense.
So does the 16 million that on like option 1 and 2, 16,725, is that subject to remonstrance, or is that 5,750 some thousand times 3?
That's a great question. And I think when that was modeled out in discussions with Dr. Grimmel and Mr. Markham, that the assumption was that you could point to 3 distinct individual projects that were just being funded at the same time. Because that's also permissible. If you can, with a straight face say we have 3 different projects at 3 different facilities, for example, we're just finding efficiencies in doing these all at the same time and just having one set of issuance costs, for example, then we'd be able to render our opinion at the end of the day saying that those are validly issued tax exempt bonds. And I think that was the assumption with that bill, that was that it was 3 separate and distinct non-controlled projects with a price tag of about $5.575 million for each individual one.
That is correct, sir.
Eric,
Now,
just another question with that. So let's say we did a project at the elementary school for 5.5 million, we did a project at the high school for 5.5, and we did a project, let's just say, here at the junior high for 5.5. And let's say our elementary project came in at only 4 million, can we take that other million and move it?
another great question. Unfortunately, the answer is no. That's the downside of separating out projects and not combining them to make them subject to one process. Because what we have to do from a legal perspective in each individual case is to look at and adopt a resolution early on that says the elementary project is not going to exceed 5.57 million. Same with the other ones. And the argument back from the DLGF side is if this one project was going to be $6 or $7 million, then that should have been subject to process. Even though you had another project where bids came in low, the DLGF says you have other uses for that. You can use it to pay down debt, you can use it for alternates to that facility, equipment, whatever the case may be. But the restriction is it cannot be turned around and applied towards another facility, because then at the end of the day, you are increasing that total project cost above and beyond that threshold.
Okay, to take on to that real quick, if we were to do a centralized cafeteria and it would be its own project, and it would come in at, say, $5 million, would that be considered another building for us? How would that factor into this? If we can't take it from the junior high, we can't take it from the high school, and it has to be its own project, how does that factor into this?
So the way I would envision that is, we look at it 2 different ways. For purposes of your project and these thresholds that we're talking about, we can ignore what facility that we would tie it to some extent. So if you look at that cafeteria facility being constructed and built, how much money would it take? And if it takes $5 million, then you are below any threshold regarding a clipboard raise or a referendum. Later on in the process, we would examine, are we going to make this a new mortgage or are we going to tie it to an existing mortgage? But for our purposes, that's separate, and that more has to do with how we structure the financing from the perspective of bondholders and what kind of a trust indenture we're looking at, et cetera. So, 2 different questions. I think the one that's of more immediate interest to you is if we can define a cafeteria project at less than $5.57 million, is that permissible? And the answer is yes.
That's in addition to the junior high and high school 5.57 availability, correct?
Correct. If you're talking about 3 different projects and you have a clearly defined high school project of $5.5 million, I'll just round down. You have a clearly defined junior high project of $5.5 million, and if those 2 items can be done each unto themselves without the construction of the cafeteria project, then we could, like I said, render our opinion that those are validly issued tax exempt bonds. And then furthermore, if the $5.5 million cafeteria project was, the scope of it was such that it can be done or not done, and it doesn't matter what happens at the junior high, actual existing facility and the high school facility, then that would be deemed a separate project.
Okay, I got a question here. We worked on a strategic plan here, and there's stuff all over the district. There's athletic facilities, there's security stuff at the elementary school. We kind of ignored one building because we looked at maybe consolidating it. So here's my question under option 3. could we do like $10 million for, say, 15 years, which is gonna lower the payment, and say we're gonna do 1.75 at the elementary school, we're gonna do 4 million for a central cafeteria, we're gonna do the balance, modifications to the junior high and the high school. As long as those prices are broke out going into the project, and we do stay under the 10 million, and maybe we go 15 years, that doesn't stop us from, in say 3 years, going into a phase 2 and going back and getting this other 5 million to do some other projects. Is that correct? Trying to do
That's correct, the way you phrased it. Let me tell you 2 different ways. And one is, again, if we had clearly defined projects, we would conduct a 1028 or a project hearing for each of those individual projects, probably at the same time, but clearly define the scope of each and the estimated cost of each. And again, then we'd be looking at just combining into one financing for the sake of efficiencies. Now, in the alternative, going back to a question that was raised earlier, if you opted to combine all those into one $10 million borrowing and made it subject to petition remonstrance, we'd have a couple of hearings, we'd wait 30 days to see if anyone files a petition with the county, and if they don't, we could continue on and just fund those projects. The benefit being there that if one project came in over budget and the other one came in under budget, you had money that could be moved around, then it would be legally permissible, because the argument then is you put forth one kind of smorgasbord, if you will, of projects that you present to the community at one time, you held multiple hearings on it, and therefore it allowed that money to become a little bit more fungible. But we could do either way.
Can we do 9.9 million for 15 years and stay under remonstrance?
At the 9.9 million level, it would be subject to petition remonstrance. It would not be subject to referendum at that dollar amount.
We got a question.
Okay, anything over 5.5 up to 10. 10, more than 10 takes it to the next one. Okay, I see it. I got it. Thank you.
Dave, what you're asking is basically taking it all at once. How is that different than the 16.75 million? Well, how is that different than taking 10 million at once versus 725 million, and we stay at the far left side of that graph? How is that different?
The amount of time, and you're handcuffing the board coming behind you. They have to raise.
I know that, but you mentioned taking 10 million for, just an example, 10 million for 15 years?
Yeah.
Whatever, it doesn't really matter. Taking 10 million versus 16.725, but taking the 16.725 stays on the left side of that graph you have up there right now, and the 10 million would be, or 9.9 million would be on the middle to right side. How is that different? That's what I'm asking about.
Well, how much interest do you pay for one?
Okay, I'm talking about taking the funds out. Are we gonna be on a subject to a remonstrance on the 16.725? If we take that all at once? Okay.
Unless you break it out into 3 separate projects under 5.7 at each building.
Right. But yeah, so if we break it out into 3 separate projects, how is that different than breaking out the 10 million into 3 separate projects?
Are you just asking like fees and those kind of things? If
No.
they're 3 separate?
What I'm getting at is if we can take the 16.725 and break it out into the 3 separate projects and stay on the left side of that graph that you just had up there.
The 5.575.
Yes. But that equals to 16,725. I'm just using the numbers we have here. And we stay on the left side of that graph where we aren't subject to remonstrance or anything of that nature. We have a set of 5.7 whatever million per building. How is that any different than saying 10 million and we have 3 million at this building already set and 3 million at this building already set and 4 million at this building already set? How is that different than what you just specified on the 16,725?
If I understand what you're saying, is you could do that as long as there are 3 separate projects, you're just not borrowing at your total capacity that you're allowed to.
Correct, but how are we subject
I believe.
to the middle and the right side of that graph versus,
We wouldn't be if you divide it out, but if you don't divide it out, then you would be subject.
so if we do divide it out, we're okay on the left side still, which is what you asked that question and I was lost at that. So, okay, so is that accurate? That's correct. If we borrow $10 million and we separate it out and all of them are under $5 million, we're still on the left side of that graph, correct? Am I accurate on that?
As long as they are 3 distinct separate.
Okay.
Right, Eric?
I always think of it in terms of buildings. You have 5.57 per
Right.
building. You don't have to use all of
Right.
that. But that's kind
Well-
of your target. Don't go over that. That way we can keep it under there.
Right.
And they can work their magic on how that rolls out.
So that counteracted your question then, I think. You said 9.9 million and whatever.
Right, and he explained that. If you go over 5.7, between 5.7 and 10 is that middle column right there.
For one building.
Huh?
For one building.
No, if you go over
See, this is,
5.7,
It could
I
be
think-
all of them. It depends how you group your project. So what you could do is say, we have $8 million worth of projects that we're just gonna lump all together in one project, then it would have to go to remonstrance. The one positive that Eric said, if you do that, is if
yeah, if you
you
come
can
under
move
one, you
monies,
can
then
swish it
if you're
around.
over in one area or under in another, where here, when you go under 5.5, 3 separate projects, you cannot move those monies. It has to be used
Gotcha.
for
Yeah.
your declaration of project.
my thought process on asking for option 3 was with the strategic plan and so many things and so many different, areas, that if we did that one and did it for 15 years instead of 10 years and 8 months, that leaves us it leaves the people sitting in the seats after us some leeway for borrowing money in a year or 2 or 3 years if something else comes up. But if the community supports this, then, if Amy's project is forecast at 2.2 million and it comes in at 1.8, if the community supports it, we can take that and maybe add it over here in, the lecture hall or building the hallway between the new central cafeteria. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I think ultimately we gotta get to that point where we just kind of whittle down, here's the priorities at each building, and then we have to try to price that to see where we're gonna fall. And we may be way over in one building and under in another, and then that's gonna help guide us on which of these options do we go with. So I think that's kind of the bigger, all this information is good because there's just so much to it. But at some point, we really have to whittle down what is the project. This is what we're committing to in theory, and then we've got to find out, okay, what's that cost now today, as opposed to when we had it kind of bid out before, we know prices have changed. So trying to put us in a position, okay, here's what we've got, now here's the cost to it, and now we can try to decide how do we finance that, how do we go about defining these projects, or, you know, where do we go? I think that'll help guide us even a little bit more.
So it is very good information. Thank you, gentlemen, this evening. Good, great information. The thing is, I mean, when we look at where we're at, you just said it, Jeremy, we gotta decide, you know, what are those priorities? I mean, I don't wanna spend money for the sake of maintaining the tax cap. Matter of fact, if it goes down a little bit for the community, fine. But I think that's where we are in definition is what do we really, you know, what's really a value of an investment to this school corporation? What do we need to spend? Coming back with these guys, and then, you know, I think this is good information to kind of percolate, you know, while we're thinking about that. But I mean, we got a couple things to look at, and a couple assumptions to make about what we do want to do, you know, with tax rates. Does that bother us? And then I like what what you guys are talking about is basically flexibility of future. So I mean, the more we borrow, the longer we borrow that. The other side of this is interest payment, right? I mean, so I think there's, you know, it's about a 5-factor balance when you look at what we're doing, and the most important thing is figuring out, Dad Burnett, how much do we want to spend to invest in this school corporation? Then I think, you know, then we can make some intelligent decisions on this. I think we could bounce around another hour tonight, you know, with different scenarios and things, but.
I do have a question, Eric. If we end up doing a petition remonstrance race and it fails, how long before we can go back and do the 5.57? Is there a?
There's a prohibition for a substantially similar project on petition remonstrance for 1 year. Except for referendum, that standard is 2 years, unless you get a petition signed saying you only want to wait one. For right now, the petition remonstrance prohibition is 1 year.
So there's consequences if you do that. Thank you.
Eric, I have a question on as far as spacing projects out over time. Is there any guidance on that? I mean, if say you want to do $8 million worth of stuff in one building, can you do $4 million and then next year do another $4 million?
In short, yes. It would be highly dependent upon how you contract those out. So, for example, it would not be advisable to enter into one $8 million contract and borrow $4 million in year one and then come back and do another $4 million because, you know, with those facts and circumstances, if the DLGF were called upon, for example, to review that, they would say, look, here's one $8 million contract, this is the project. You know, in contracted, you can delineate even at the same facility. For example, you know, we've got comfortable, if you have, you know, just using the same numbers, if you have $4 million of HVAC work, and that's the priority. You got to replace the boilers and chillers, you got to replace the ductwork systems from start to finish, and that costs us $4 million, and that's the priority. Then you could do that, and then you could come back and borrow another $4 million for a classroom addition, for example. So as long as, again, you can point to the work, the project being an end unto itself and not being dependent upon any other type of work, that's the best guidance we have at this juncture.
Thank you.
I have another quick question. Our community's got declining enrollment, and we had a gentleman in here explaining that in 4 to 6 years, our forecast is we're going to be taking money out of our operating fund to pay our debt service. So that's kind of the thought process behind not doing a great big amount of money for a whole lot of years. What are you seeing from other school districts facing with this? Are they moving into phases and doing smaller projects?
We're seeing a variety of things, actually. Anywhere from school corporation to run an operating referendum to buttress those funds to the extent that debt service creates pressure on those other funds, to consolidating facilities to hopefully reduce operating costs on that front. Then you're right, too, you know, to the extent we have clients who are seeing declining enrollment and looking at at things like consolidating facilities, they're not right now spending a lot of dollars on those unless the dollars are going towards, you know, for example, we had a client last year who turned their, you know, what was their intermediate school into a larger grade coverage so they could close one of their other facilities. So they invested money to be able to repurpose it for that reason. I don't know, Jason, if you have any thoughts on that front?
It's a great question. You know, the school circuit breaker losses in the operations fund, you know, they have gone up. You know, last year, for example, the circuit breaker losses were $78,000 in total. This year, it's $100,000, and so you know, sometimes that does hurt your operations fund. As I believe Darren Bates, I believe, spoke to the board and talked about that a little bit. But the operations levy on a net basis actually grew in 2021 because the operations levy was able to grow at 4.2% per state statute. And so that outpaced the extra $25,000 in loss. So it is definitely something to be cognizant of, though.
Thank you.
And if I can backpedal to a comment that was made a few minutes ago in the context of having all these options and, you know, not being able to pin one down, as I look at options 1, 2, and 3 in particular, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but options 1, 2, and 3 all have a first debt service payment in 2023. And so for Indiana Public School Corporations, whenever you issue bonds, your levy can begin the following year. Option 4, I believe, had repayment beginning in 2022. So if you selected option 4, we'd have to go through our process, all of our legal steps, and have the bonds closed by the end of this calendar year. If you were opting for 1, 2, or 3, you would have a little bit more time for contemplation because we wouldn't need to do a bond issue until calendar year 2022 in order to get that levy beginning in 2023.
But just to be clear, we can figure out what we want to do with this building, and this is going to cost that, and what we want to do with athletics, what we want to do with academics, what we want to do with cafeteria, and whatever that price is. As long as it's all priced out separately, we can borrow one bond for a specified term and do all the projects. And if it's option 3 and the public goes along with it, then if this one comes in under budget and this one's a little over, we can route Peter to pay Paul. I want to make sure I got that straight.
If you've gone through the process of having 3 separate projects, 3 individual $5.57 million projects, we cannot route Peter to pay Paul.
No, that's
alone, and we cannot blend funds, if you will.
right. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is one project, but part of it might be at this building, part of it might be, it'll be identified, but it'll be all over the district. What? Right, subject to petition remonstrance.
So if you have a project that is between $5.57 and $10 million, pull the screen back up. If you define one project that's between that $5.5 and $10 million threshold, and it's at different sites, if you put it forth to the public as one project for purposes of your hearing, et cetera, then yes, in that case, if one project came in under budget, if you will, and the other one was slightly over, then those dollars would become budgetable because you put it forth to the public as one single project for purposes of their consideration.
Thank you.
Sure.
Board, any other questions? Dr. Ramon, Jeremy?
I did send this to all of your emails, hopefully you got it. I don't know if you saw it.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Eric, Jason, thank you guys, we appreciate it, your time, and if we have other questions, I can shoot you emails as I get them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, and glad we had good weather today instead of the one that got snowed out a couple of months back.
Thank you.
Always glad to be of service. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Okay, first reading, 3.2 of MES student. Do you want to do these together, Dr. Rameau, or?
That's up to you. I
Sure.
maybe take one at
Or-
a time in case you have any questions. I don't know if I can answer them, but I will certainly try. If I could just say MES had no changes. I think that was put in the packet. She said she did have one where she just changed it from semesters to trimesters in regard to lost and found items. So that was all MES had. Any questions about that? And I might have to be the go-between if you do have questions, so. Bad time of year for everybody. MIS had very few changes. He did highlight all those.
Kudos for that.
Any questions on that? Okay, and then the junior, senior high, parent, or the handbook there. Mrs. Mobley sent over that she did have some changes. To allow administration to hold students and parents accountable for attendance. Students are allowed to miss 10 days in a school year, those being marked as excused parent. The absences do not include doctor excused. Once a student has reached 10 days of absence, he or she will be marked unexcused, and attendance will be monitored by school administration. Attendance remediation will take place, and DCS and probation can and will be contacted. So right now, that's been problematic, because when you have students that are a lot of absences, because of the way we mark it in our system, they cannot be turned over to DCS and probation. So that's why that adjustment is
How
made.
how did COVID inflict on that with attendance?
Well, we still had that
Remotely?
struggle. I mean, we still did attendance, yeah, with students that were remote.
Was it accurate? I mean,
The best that we could do. So it was something we kind of thought. That's one of the reasons we had the remote learning coordinator to go out to the homes with the SRO and try to do our very best on that. They did a pretty good job, but there's still students not doing work.
is there anything specific in the handbooks that's changed because of COVID? Like, in particular, like these masks, we haven't updated to require masks or
So
anything
that would all
like that?
that would all be in the
So-
reentry plan again. We were required to do that for ESSA 3.0 anyway. So we've already been working on that. I think it's 30 days after the submission date, we have to have it posted on our website.
I mean, it is kind of weird that all along we've heard, safest place for kids is in the school, and they're not transmitting it, and now that we got this mass vaccination, we're kind of the only ones in the world wearing masks that I see anywhere, so I mean, I can kind of see where some of the parents are coming from on this whole thing, but, hopefully we get to the end of school and then,
Just following the governor's orders, so.
Any other comments or questions on this one? Okay, we got one more, don't we? Technology.
The technology handbook really
I-
wasn't any changes except for updating dates or.
I had one question about the high school handbook. Has there been any discussion on updating, I should say, the the attire part of it, the school policy on, or the school policy on attire?
dress code?
Yeah,
Well, we actually consulted attorneys consulted the ISBA attorney, and then Dr. Lippy had something from another one, and I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head. But yes, it's basically to keep us out of hot water, so that's how that policy was developed.
What, back in the day, before, like many years ago?
No, this one was just something I most recently saw.
For the dress code? Okay, I didn't see, so that changed this year as well?
It's always evolving, so we're paying attention to those cases that come out. We're always making sure we're looking at what, ISBA sends out, and like different cases around the state or the nation, and so we try to really adjust it when it's necessary based off of that input.
Okay, so did that change this year from last year?
It did not change this year,
Okay. Okay.
but we did seek legal advice when we went through some issues at the beginning of the year, and they felt like what we had was right.
Okay.
This will come back then
It'll come back for a second reading,
on the 8th?
correct?
Okay, so anybody wants to take the time to go through it and
If
Well,
you have
so-
any questions, send me
yeah.
an email, I'll be glad to.
get with Dr. Grimo before the 8th and anybody
Thank you.
else? Okay, 3.6, counselor, we had talked about SEL counselor, and it was in the CARES 2.0 list, and just looking at the 3.0 list, so I'd just like Dr. Grimo to explain what the difference between the counselor and the counselor SEL, and what we're looking at for mental health.
We haven't got it all worked out, but we would like the counselor that we're looking at hiring to be a social emotional learning coordinator for the district, because this counselor would be placed here, would have the lowest caseload. And so we feel like we could maybe add that piece on there, because we're looking at social and emotional curriculum pieces, and not just for students, but for staff, and we've been reviewing those over the last month, trying to come up with, I think we've narrowed it down to a few now, but would like to be able to put that on top of a school counselor. And you have to think about when school counselors are trained to do their job, they're not the heavy lifters in what a therapist would be. So they're getting the day-to-day, whether it's a conflict resolution type piece, or it's teaching social and emotional health and well-being and all of that, doing small group interventions. Those are the kind of things that counselors in our school do, which is a big portion of what we do. It's the most. So that's why we would like to get the therapist and outsource the therapist. I think we put $25,000 in to be able to do that. And we do have a list of students that we would like to target, that we know just have needs beyond what our counselors can do. So that's what we're looking at to be able to put in place in this bill.
Can you kind of explain, I mean, how do you envision that outsourcing working? I mean, do the kids go see someone, or does that person come here?
They would come in here. I've already talked to a few people about that. But they would come in here, and it could be they're here every day of the week, they're here 3 days a week, whatever, but they'll be consistent in their schedule, and it just depends. Like even if you go to a therapist outside, it may be only once a month, it may be only twice a month, whatever that looks like, and it's probably going to depend on our caseload and the need, and so we already have that kind of put together. It's just a matter of working that out with the different agencies I've been talking to.
But it would be a trained therapist that is
Yes,
spending some time in whatever school they need to.
yes.
Okay.
They would probably travel to
Right.
all of them.
Wherever they need, yeah.
They don't
Okay.
know what their schedules
So-
are.
So to confirm what you said on this, and tell me if I'm wrong, we have outsourcing the therapists, possibly a couple of them depending on our need. And then hiring someone with SEL capabilities as well. So will that person have the same workload as the guidance counselors have? Will they see, do they have additional capabilities from the guidance counselor?
Well, we hope so, but we're not sure. It just depends on what's out there and what we
No,
can hire.
I thought you said to hire a specific person, not just outsource, right?
For a therapist.
Right, outsource the therapist.
The counselor is gonna do their counseling with the 7th and 8th graders, but they would also have social and emotional responsibilities that drive our corporation and say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, be able to coordinate all of that.
Okay, so your thoughts on recommendation is to hire another guidance counselor with SEL capabilities, is that correct?
Yeah, they all have SEL capabilities,
Okay.
that's what they do. They work with social and emotional learning,
Okay,
all of them.
all right,
But
so,
this one is gonna be more of a coordinator for all of that programming, making sure we all stay on the same page, K-12. And that we're following that curriculum, so as the kids are going through, they're hearing the same thing from our staff. You know.
how many guidance counselors do we have currently in each building?
Well, 2 at the high school,
Okay,
1 at MES and 1 at MIS. And then she also comes over here. You know.
okay. Jeremy, what's an average, and I know this may be totally off the cuff, but what's the average starting salary for a guidance counselor of that nature?
They're essentially part of the bargaining, so they're part of the teacher contract, so they would come in at a salary as a teacher would, depending
Okay.
on years of experience. But they would have a little added pay because they have more days. They're contracted at a few additional days as compared to teachers.
So
and
we
the
need,
odds of us getting a brand new counselor at that lower pay, I don't know that we've done that
Yeah, I mean, that,
for a while,
there's
so.
not many of those typically.
well, I know that we put aside on CARES Act 2 and then possibly CARES Act 3, $80,000. Now, I know that changed on
Yes.
Plan B. So if we're outsourcing the therapist, which is great, that a lot of schools do that, that's fine, as long as it's quality, which it will be. But what is that $80,000 then for? And I know that includes benefits too, but
Right, that's just on the high end, just
For
guessing.
one-
We
for
don't-
one-
Just one. That'd be one counselor, potentially, if they come in at the highest pay scale, and our scale's at 67.6, and if they have family benefits, you throw in,
yeah.
15,000
Are you-
more, that's your 80.
Are you earmarking for the MIS then for this person? Is
No,
that,
it'd be this building.
okay, so they wouldn't actually see any students then? 7th and 8th
7th
grade?
and 8th grade.
Okay, 7th and 8th grade.
Right now, we have one counselor that's covering
Yeah.
4th, 5th, and 6th at MIS and 7th and 8th grade here.
And we have one counselor covering K through 3.
Right,
That's tough.
so if that helps. I do have a question. You said agencies, so you're looking at more than one
Yes.
vendor, I'm gonna call them a vendor for the mental
But
health
actually
therapy?
talk to 2 different ones just to see if they have it. Before we start moving forward, I want to get some idea on costs and things, so.
Have you talked to Mr. Kiefaber at MSD? I think I read they just signed a contract for the mental health therapist.
I have not, but I know who he's using, and I've talked to both of them.
Okay, that's what I wanted to find out. What was my other question?
You can always email me. if
Yeah,
get
there you
anything
go.
else, or call me.
Any other questions on the counselors? Oh, that's one note. do you think this will be on the agenda for the June meeting? To approve the hire?
We're planning on pointing 3.0 on that, and it's part of that.
Okay, so 3.0 will be at the June 8th meeting on the agenda,
Yes.
and the counselor and the mental health will
And
vote.
we
Yes,
would like
will
to
be
be
part
able
of
to wrap up what that job description is and all of that, because we're just trying to gather all that information. And so that's why we haven't really brought it.
Yeah, we just got our final allocation for 3.0 yesterday. They gave us the final, and it's the exact amount that they gave us for our pre-allocation, the 1.7 some odd million dollars. So we were able to sit today and go through things. So by the end of the week, I will email all of you the 3.0 recommendations that we're presenting, so that you'll have that well in advance. But we'll have it on the agenda then for approval at June 8th.
Thank you for that, because I was just gonna ask you if you could get that to us. I know policy says 3 days,
Yeah.
but if you could get that to us ahead of time.
Yeah, you'll have it about a week and a half.
Anybody else on the counselor? Okay, hearing of patrons? Superintendent comments? School board comments?
Got a lot of good things going on, just keep it up.
Yeah, we definitely do. With all the things that have gone on in the last, month here that have come to light, you know, Teacher of the Year, STEM certification. I shouldn't be reading these off because I don't have them wrote down. I'm gonna forget something, so, just a lot of good, it's kind of refreshing to see a lot of good stuff in the headlines, so that's all I got.
We're getting ready to release our support staff person of the year on Thursday, so we'll have that as well.
Any other board comments?
Congratulations on the end of the school year.
Made one more.
Congratulations, everybody.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Inslee?
Second.
Mr. Brubaker? All in favor? We're adjourned at 7:30.